Good morning, everybody. This is a live extreme weather briefing, and we have a significant severe weather threat that is going to materialize later on this afternoon through this evening across southeastern Kansas, southwestern Missouri, into eastern Oklahoma. The greatest tornado threat is going to be ahead of a surface low evolving across southeastern Kansas, northeastern Oklahoma, eventually moving in to southwestern Missouri. So far this morning, we do have some severe storms that have erupted quickly across northern Kansas. These are elevated to the north of a warm front. That warm front right now is across southern Kansas, but these storms have prompted a couple severe thunderstorm warnings this morning, including near the Salina area, dropping hail up to the size of golf balls. Here you can see using the Radar Omega app, some of those storms oriented along I-70 off to the east of the I-35 corridor now. The only severe thunderstorm warning is closing in on the KTWX radar site. Some of these storms have dropped hail up to the size of golf balls, but they do look like they are starting to weaken just a bit as they are lifting off to the north. As I mentioned, these are elevated to the north of a warm front that's oriented across southern Kansas. Still plenty of convective inhibition so far this morning ahead of the main heating of the day, but that warm front is expected to lift north throughout the day. This is the WRAP forecast at about 20Z. And by this time, you can see that surface low is across far southern Kansas. Capes increase above 4,000. You can see that warm front extending off to the east as well of the Wichita area near there. This warm front here is going to enhance that wind shear later on today. Any supercell thunderstorms that are able to develop ahead of this surface low and interact with that warm front will even have a chance for a strong tornado threat as they move across southeastern Kansas into southwestern Missouri through evening, eventually back building down into northeastern Oklahoma as well. We are going to break down that surface map. Here on I-70 to the west of Salina, we've already got northerly winds now getting reinforced by that morning convection that has developed across northern Kansas. That surface low is a little bit further north than many of the short-range models have analyzed this morning. You can see that surface low right now is across the Oklahoma Panhandle, and this is going to lift off to the east-northeast across southern Kansas, and it is ahead of this surface low and in the vicinity of that warm front where it does look like there is even a chance of a strong tornado later on this afternoon. This is the forecast, WRAP sounding in far southeastern Kansas, near just to the east of the Parsons, Kansas area, and this shows a very large looped photograph. Low-level jet in excess of 30 knots there, about a kilometer above the ground, relatively weak surface winds, storm motion of about 30 knots over to the due east, and that creates a critical angle of near 90 degrees. This is a textbook large tornado type of a sounding here. It's just a question. There is a forecast failure scenario where if this morning convection is too substantial, that could pinch the warm sector off into Oklahoma, be a little bit further south of a track of that surface low. That could reduce the wind shear just a little bit. But I do expect near and just after evening, there could be a couple tail-end Charlie storms down into far southeastern Oklahoma that certainly could have a tornado threat as well, extending after sunset. And I do think that there's going to be supercells that are going to develop well off to the south into southeastern Oklahoma, producing large hail and that tornado threat. But I do think that the threat for strong tornadoes is certainly greatest across southeastern Kansas into southwestern Missouri. Yesterday, the big news was the DERECHO that happened. We had a bow echo that was producing severe wind, well over a 250 mile long track across 3 or 4 different states. It eventually passed through central Nashville as well. Nearly 250 wind reports, severe wind reports. It did produce some big hail as well early yesterday morning across southwestern Missouri into northern Arkansas. Let me show you these reports quickly. And really, for a DERECHO, the length of distance and the longevity of the squall line are the defining characteristics. Also, there are some cloud top defining characteristics, and you can't go over 2.5 hours without having a severe wind report. And here you can see that DERECHO track. Normally these happen closer to the summer. They ride over the top of an anticyclone or a big ridge, those summer anticyclones that dominate the central and southern U.S. But this developed yesterday morning across southeastern Kansas. When we did our briefing yesterday morning, it was across southwestern Missouri. We realized that there would also be some major severe weather across northern Arkansas, and this continued to intensify, reaching peak intensity, I believe, in western and central Tennessee, moving through the Nashville area, even causing damage across some of the areas from the violent tornadoes that passed through central Tennessee earlier this spring. Even a couple isolated severe reports across eastern Kentucky. But remember, yesterday morning we were talking about how this derecho would try to propagate into that deeper moisture. We also saw that there was quite a bit of mid and deep layer shear that was going to maintain a vertical orientation of that convection along the leading edge. That certainly happened, maintained its longevity across several different states, well over the 250-mile length of the derecho required. Severe wind reports were produced throughout its life cycle, so that we didn't even come close to touching that 2.5-hour period in between reports. There were severe reports produced throughout its life cycle. And now let me show you, I did save a couple radar images while it was at its peak. Got to pull these up on the fly real quickly. And it was definitely shaped more like a bow. Certainly was shaped like a bow as it moved throughout its life cycle. It did prompt a couple of tornado warnings also, but no confirmed tornado reports yet. But they will have to go out and do that damage survey, of course. There it is. Let me show you this radar image here, guys. And I am chasing today. I'm going to be heading down into far southeastern Kansas. That's where I think that there is a threat of those strong tornadoes later on this afternoon. And here's a radar image that I took of that derecho at about peak intensity. You can definitely see the large-scale bow here, well-defined bow echo. Usually the greatest winds are right along near the apex of the bow, which looks to be near just to the north of the I-40 corridor. It was weird that it did prompt a tornado warning south of the apex of that bow. Normally the area to the north of the apex is where you get a lot of cyclonic vorticity generation near the northern comma head, and that's usually where the greatest tornado threat can happen. But this bow is definitely moved off to the east through yesterday evening, producing a lot of severe wind reports across the Nashville area. They will go out and do some damage surveys to see if any of these along the northern edge of the bow produce some spin-ups. These did prompt some tornado warnings well to the north of the Cookeville area too yesterday, and I haven't seen any confirmed tornado reports yet. We just looked at those storm reports, but it did produce some of those warnings. I did analyze those on radar, and it looked like one of them may have produced to the northeast of the Nashville area and to the north of the apex of that bow echo. Let's head back on over and break down the detailed models. Here you can see those cloud tops again. This is from the College of DuPage site, but you can see these severe storms that erupted across northern Kansas. You can also see the northerly winds coming around on the backside of this developing MCS, and just depending on how intense these storms are across northern and eastern Kansas, they could pinch the warm sector down into Oklahoma. So as I head east toward the Salina area and then drop south into the warm sector, right now I really like that southeastern Kansas into southwestern Missouri area, but it is possible that there's just going to be too much elevated convection across this area. I do think though that when this surface low begins to eject and moves off to the east-northeast along that warm front, the low-level jet should increase out ahead of it. An elevated mixed layer will come in around the south side, but there certainly are some failure scenarios with the forecast through this evening. The RAP model, one of my favorite models, this is the 0 to 1 kilometer energy helicity index, basically showing where that low-level shear co-locates best with that instability. Here in southeastern Kansas, this was that sounding that I showed you guys. You can see a lot of directional shear out ahead of that surface low and along the warm front. Winds increase over 50 knots at the mid-levels of the atmosphere. Big looping hodograph here. So if this model verifies, there's likely going to be a strong tornado threat that will materialize across far southeastern Kansas, southwestern Missouri, back into northeastern Oklahoma. And with the strength of the morning convection so far this morning across northern and eastern Kansas, I could see this warm sector being pinched just a little bit into northeastern Oklahoma. Looking at the latest RAP. So the HRRR is a bit more progressive with that surface low. It's likely feeling the effects just a little bit of the morning convection, but you can see that it has the triple point into southwestern Missouri at about 6 p.m. Looking at the composite reflectivity, it shows a broken line of supercells this storm here in southwestern Missouri, at least if this model is accurate, it's probably going to be a pretty big tornado producer up there. And then it does show those supercells building down into all the way to central Oklahoma, even Norman and Oklahoma City area by about 6 to 7 p.m. These are probably going to be tornado warned supercells in northeastern Oklahoma, producing a lot of wind, large hail potential. And you can also see an increase too in the 0 to 1 kilometer storm relative felicity across southern and southeastern Oklahoma. That's in response to the evening low-level jet increasing. So I do think that some tail-end Charlies down here in central Oklahoma, as they move into eastern and even southeastern Oklahoma, will have a chance of a tornado threat, pretty robust tornado threat near just after sunset. But you can see the increased values up here right near the warm front and ahead of that surface low. This is where those soundings are most prime for that strong tornado threat, and that's the area that we are initially targeting right now. This is the HRRR though. The wrap, I believe, has a slightly better handle on the morning convection and the strength of these morning storms, the severe storms as well that are in place across northern Kansas. Going back here to look at your comments really quick. Good morning, everybody. Yeah, I did see that the tornado was reported there. It hasn't made the Storm Prediction Center official reports. They're going to have to send out some National Weather Service survey teams and see if that's straight line wind damage or if it's a tornado. With a derecho like this, though, you could have straight line winds that can easily cause EF0, EF1 damage along its path. So it is going to be quite a process of discriminating between that straight line wind damage and that rotational. But it is officially, by definition, a derecho. I'm definitely going to call it a derecho. Check out Ginger McPherson's photos. She shot some incredible photos of the shelf cloud and the Mamatis back behind that shelf as well. Billy, unfortunately, it does look like Joplin could be right in the area where there could be a strong tornado threat later on. One thing that I think could save the day is this morning convection that is dominating this so far this morning across northern Kansas, eastern Kansas. That could slow the northward progression of the warm front. But boy, looking at that wrap analysis, it sure looks like that warm front is going to have no problem lifting north unimpeded. But the triple point there, southwestern Missouri into southeastern Kansas, is the main target. And then I will be able to drop down into northeastern Oklahoma as this broken line of supercells develops near and just after sunset. Low-level jet, though, will be in excess of 30 knots out here in southwestern Missouri, out ahead of that surface low. And by this time, the effective surface low is in southeastern Kansas, moving into southwestern Missouri. You can see some southeasterly winds out ahead of this. Off to the south of it, the winds are more out of a south-southwest direction at the low levels, which creates slightly less favorable photographs, but still favorable for a tornado threat. This is on the pivotalweather.com site. You can see just a little bit of mixing down there, a slightly drier lower level, southwesterly winds at the surface. So you definitely have a lot more directional turning further north up here near the warm front, near the surface low, southwestern Missouri into southeastern Kansas. And this is why you usually want to target the nose of this cape axis, and you're talking capes well in excess of 3,000 all the way back into eastern Oklahoma. But it's this triple point, that little ripple that you can see along the warm front just ahead of that surface low that's moving across southeastern Kansas that looks the most volatile. There is a chance, though, that this MCS, or mesoscale convective complex, that is in place across northern Kansas into eastern Kansas is going to dominate and then pinch this warm sector a little bit further south of where the surface low tracks, and that certainly could reduce the severe weather threat. Either way, though, I think there's going to be significant severe weather even to the south of the surface low if this northern mode does not materialize, and I hope it doesn't for the sake of southwestern Missouri. But I do think that these are going to be big supercells with occasional tornado warnings, producing substantial hail as well. Plenty of bulk shear. This is a 0 to 6 kilometer shear. But you can see how the shear is greatest a little bit further north, where you just get that slight backing of those low-level winds. That even boosts the 0 to 6 kilometer shear quite a bit. So I'm really liking this southeastern Kansas into southwestern Missouri into far northeastern Oklahoma type of a target. Looking at the 700 millibar winds. Decent 700 millibar winds out of the due west at about 50 knots too. That shows that there's quite a bit of directional shear out there. And again, looking at the surface map, you can really see where that warm front is this morning. Across far southern Kansas, across most of Kansas, you've got temperatures in the upper 50s to near 60. Down into Oklahoma, they're already warming. A little bit of stratus with that moisture. Surface low, though, is a little bit further north than those models are showing in the Oklahoma Panhandle area. But really, we've got to watch closely as I'm approaching the target, and I want to see how this convective complex that is dominating so far this morning, really want to see how that materializes and see how far south it pinches the warm sector. And if that happens, by the time I get to Wichita, I'll be able to decide whether I want to keep going east into far southeastern Kansas or drop into that Oklahoma target with those supercells back building all the way into central Oklahoma. So even though I'm keeping the same target area a little further north, there is a chance that this could be moved into northeastern Oklahoma, maybe a little bit south of there as well. My plan is to go live this evening to cover this potentially significant severe weather event, live storm chasing. I should have hung back in Colorado yesterday. I didn't think there was going to be a supercell right near just after sunset. Instead, I blasted all the way here to near Salina to try to get a good night's sleep, because after the chase tonight, I've got to drive all the way back home. And it looks like I've been talking to Mark quite a bit, Chase and Spin on Twitter, and he's been working hard on the infrasound stuff and measuring those gravity waves that can be emitted by tornadoes, pressure waves, and also in the infrasound frequency. He's basically a wave expert, big time series analysis expert as well. And he's going to try to give me a couple of these sensors in time for when it gets really active during late May, so I can deploy those really close to a tornado, and then he can try to measure the signal emitted by some of these tornadoes from close range in terms of the infrasound. But that's some research that we can do even when we can't have the whole team out here shooting rockets and tracking the sensors inside the tornado. So that's some pretty exciting stuff as well. Mark's been working really hard on that infrasound stuff. So I'm going to pack up here and head toward my target area. I'm probably about 4 hours away from the target, but I'm going to go live when I get a little bit closer to Wichita and let you know the decision that I've made with regard to how intense this morning complex of storms is. Thank you everybody for joining me, and I look forward to going live later on this evening as these supercell storms erupt. Stay safe everybody, never stop chasing.